and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and I'm very happy to introduce you to Karsten Kjems. Karsten is the CEO at Sonic Minds. So Karsten, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Simon. I've been looking forward to it.
Well, I'm looking forward to this discussion too. And in a prior episode of VistaTalks, we explored maybe the fundamental role of, say, sonic branding, how AI is beginning to shape its future. But I'm really, really glad that we have the Chief Executive Officer of Sonic Minds with us today on the show, because I want to see how the conversation around strategic, and I use that word specifically, strategic audio branding, it's been evolving, hasn't it, over the last few years? Where are we at in this landscape, Karsten?
Well, we also say strategic because if it isn't used strategic, it's going to be random. And for us, it's not about making more sounds. It's about making the right sounds at the right place. And for that, you need a strategy so you can answer. So you can ask yourself your questions: when do we use sound? And why do we even use sounds? What is the purpose of the sounds and music we're using? What do we want to achieve with it? And that definitely requires a strategy. So it's just as you have a social media strategy or sales strategy, you also need a strategy for sound when we're using sound, especially in the digital world nowadays, where we only have two senses. That's hearing and seeing. Right now, I can see you, Simon. I can also hear you. So it's hearing is suddenly 50% of the available bandwidth we have when we communicate online or with an app or product. So we choose as much with our ears as with our eyes. So that's why it's so important that we also, are aware of, okay, if you see something beautiful, but it sounds very cheap, what your mind starts to conflict. Okay, I see something that looks good, but it sounds kind of cheap. Then you feel, this is odd. Things are not aligned here. So that's why we need a strategy. And that's why we also approach our clients and say, do you have a strategy for how you're using sound? And to be honest, I think 90% of them say, no, we don't. Do we even use sound? They sometimes ask. Well, yes, it's not possible for brands today not to use sounds. Of course, they have on-hold music. They have film on LinkedIn or YouTube. They might have a sound in their podcast. What have we not? So, but there's no audible responsible within these companies. So that's why it's kind of random, It's Simon from marketing who found some music, and then we have John. He's also a part-time musician. He's pretty good, so he also made some music for a film. And well, then I asked the client, "Is that also how you approach your visual identity?" Oh, no, no, no. Here we have clear mark. Here's the templates. Here the master logo. Here's the secondary colors, the primary fountain colors. So yes, I say yes. That is why you need a strategy, and that's also why the leading brands that we all know in sound, McDonald's, etc., we can recognize them. They know how to use sound and why they're using sound. So that's why we need a strategy within sound, Simon.
Well, Carson, thanks for giving us that view from the top, because my brain is already shooting off in lots of different directions. But as you were talking, it kind of makes sense, whether it's that McDonald's sound that we all know. The other one is the Intel Inside that became very famous globally. Um, but it's true what you said, we probably buy as much with what we hear as what we see. And a lot of brands and companies probably aren't even using the sound element at all to
Nope.
become recognized. And am I wrong in saying that it's only the big brands that invest in sort of this sonic, approach?
Well, we see more and more middle-sized companies, also smaller companies, because they've read about it, they have heard about it, and they say, we also want to do this right from the beginning. Because having an audio strategy, an audio logo, is kind of like planting a tree. When is the best time to plant a tree? That was 20 years ago because I wanted to be big. When is the second best time? That is now. So for the big brands that have done it for many years, Intel, McDonald's, and Netflix, etc., Coca-Cola also, they know it has value. They know it's an important intangible asset for them. So we see both medium-sized company and larger companies say, okay, now is the time to invest in this because we also want to sound good. Perhaps people change jobs, Simon. So there might be some person from another company where they had an audio identity moved into another company and say, great, I'm going to do some marketing here or social media. What assets do we have? Where's your audio density? Audio density? We don't have any. You don't have any. So it's becoming more and more a standard thing for many brands because of course you're using sound. So it's not a question, are you using sound? Is how are we using it? And that's why we need, again, this strategy. And that said, for some companies, it can make more meaning to invest in audio branding because they have very much focused on social media and communication. But for other companies where that we probably also could talk about, we see a higher interest in product sounds because products and apps are becoming the primary brand touch points of many brands today. I mean, I don't know, do you have a Sony TV or what, LG, whatever, Philips TV perhaps you have? You perhaps turn it on daily, or a headset is a better example, or a car. You might drive daily, you put your headset on, or you go home, you push the button on your coffee machine. These sounds are the ones you hear the most from a brand. You don't intentionally watch a commercial from these sub brands, these brands that you might have bought, but the interaction sounds also suddenly becomes the most primary and most important ones because that's the ones you interact with. So the whole audio landscape has twisted the last couple of years from heavy TV commercial push into radio, etc., to more like I'll be interesting if you'll be interested. I might want to, subscribe to a podcast if you're sounding good. I might want to, listen to your films or your whatever if it sounds good. And if the product sounds cheap, then it's a cheap brand. So there's this change here in sound, and also because, as I mentioned earlier, digital world is 50% sound and music, but we are also using sound a lot more. We're hearing podcasts, we are talking to our radios, the Alexa, the Googles. So it's becoming more and more a dominant thing.
Yeah, I really like that. In particular, when you put it in the context of a brand might be connecting more today with the sound that it makes than the traditional, let's say, advertising, because they're the sounds in your everyday life, as you say, whether it's the button or the podcast or whatever. If it sounds good, it's kind of constantly reminding you of that brand. And I wanted to ask you though, because you used an example of maybe somebody who's come from a company that used sonic branding and they've joined a new company that doesn't. But you can also get this wrong. And I know one of the philosophies that you talk about is that the sound should add more meaning
Yes,
and value than silence. Now that sounds very easy to say, but I know there's some substance behind that because otherwise it's just noise that's been added.
that's
And my
my
question
philosophy.
for you,
Yes.
Karsten, is how does a brand then strike this balance between, impactful sound design, if I can use that term, and excessive auditory clutter for the sake of, brand repetition, if you like?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Simon. To be honest, I believe that sound design, let's separate a little bit. Let's talk about sound design. It could be in a product or in a car, all the interaction sounds you have in a car. Really good sound design shouldn't be something you notice. It should just be there. So if you were driving a brand new car and you might be exposed to 10 interaction sounds, like you're driving too fast, lane shift warning, forward collision, fasten your seatbelts, all these interaction sounds. If you then went out of the car and I asked you, what do you think about the sounds? If they were good made, you would say, what sounds? I didn't hear anything. Then I would say, yes, thumbs up, because it was done meaningful. Meaningful means that you intuitively understand what you should do when you hear the sound. And you don't get disturbed in your overall purpose, driving to a football game. What would not have been meaningful if you've been exposed to 7 different kinds of beep. What does that beep mean? What I don't know what to do, and you have to read the display for you're running out of power or whatever. That is disturbing sounds. So meaningful sounds means they have to create meaning in the situation, and that's very important for me to state that because I think I returned a water boiler recently because when it was done boiling, it sounded like a fire alarm. I went down to the shop. I said, "Listen, I already have a fire alarm. I don't need a water boiler to sound like a fire alarm. Please return it and write on the note, bad sound design." And modern households today, they have, perhaps robots, vacuum cleaners, they have a coffee machine, and all these have sounds, and you turn on your TV, have a sound, the Xbox has a sound. And if we don't get aware of that, we will get a cacophony within our homes, in our lives. And that's also why I see more and more people wearing anti-noise cancellation headphones in our public spaces. Why? Because they feel they want to have a space safe. They get too much information. And then back to your question, what can companies do then? Well, it's very important that they don't feel that they disturb people. We have clients coming to us and say, hey, we want to have some notification sounds on our app, Say, well, what is the reason you want to disturb your customer here? So a bad notification sound could be like, I'm knocking on your door 7 times a day. Hey, Simon, are you home? Simon, can you please talk to me? That would be rude. That would be offensive. And the same is with sound. Don't be rude. Make sure that you understand when you should disturb or notify your audience. Of course, I would like to get a notification if my parking ticket is running out. That's informative because I will get a fine or a ticket if I don't do something. So identify these critical moments in the user journey where sound can be added a value, either positively or perhaps negatively, to change the situation. It's very important for brands. Then again, you said they also want to communicate often. That's obviously. But if I see a film with standard, boring stock music, I feel this brand is not taking me seriously because do I look like a standard stock person? I like to have nice experiences. Why do you present me for poor music? So we choose and evaluate with all our senses. If you go into a restaurant, if the noise is too loud, you'll go out again. You haven't even tasted the food, but you don't choose it because it's either too noisy, too warm in there, too cold. Everything communicates. And when we go down to a digital space, we only have this narrow two senses. And in an instant, Simon, your brain will know this sounds cheap, this sounds odd. Also, the quality of this podcast. If the intro is boring, you'll zoom out. It's not for me. Or if the microphone was not in good quality, you wouldn't want to listen to it for 30 minutes. So everything communicates, and that's so why it has to be meaningful in the situation. And that's also why you need a strategy, because when is meaningful, and you need to have clear that in your user journey and make sure that all your brand touch points make meaningful sounds in the critical uh, moments.
That makes a lot of sense. And it, I want to come back to the word that we maybe started talking about initially, which was strategy.
Yeah,
Because, when we go past, let's say, the sound logo in inverted commas, I know a lot of brands or people working for big brands can fall into the trap of thinking that sonic branding, it's just that sound logo or that jingle.
yeah,
But actually, if you were presenting today to a room of CEOs, I know you talk to a lot of CEOs and a lot of people looking to enhance their audio strategy. There's more of a fully integrated, a more cohesive audio identity, isn't there? And I'm wondering, what does that look like in today's more digital first world, when you start talking about beyond just the jingle?
that's a good question. Yeah, definitely. In the old days, it was primarily the order logo because in the old days, what is old days? Let's define that. That was before YouTube. Back in the late 90s and early 2000, it was radio, TV, and cinemas. That was the primary uh, commercial points. And that's where it really has a good point to have an order logo at the end of the commercial so you can hear and understand who the sender was. Nowadays, the user journey is a lot more complex. You have TikTok only for young people, perhaps. You have Instagram. You have a product that might have some sounds. So to identify, you cannot just take an order logo and use that as your power on sound for your car, for instance. But what we are trying to make this what we call a flexible audio dynamic sound system, meaning that you have these different assets in your audio identity. One of them might be an order logo that is suitable for some of the channels, but if you have a headset on you're wearing daily, perhaps the order logo should be revised and make a little bit shorter version so it fits into that device. You don't want to hear a symphony every time you turn on your TV. It's just gonna have to play a sound so you know it has turned on if it even needs to play a sound. So understanding each critical touch point, are you sitting in your home and watching TV? Are you driving a car? Are you in a cinema? So what kind of music should be used in the brand touch points and channels we are communicating in. And that requires a cohesive audio identity with the right elements so you can actually employ them correctly into the different brand touch points. That said, many big companies have silos. They have the marketing department, they have the product department, they might have the social media department. They all know they have the same visual identity, but they don't talk about sound across these different departments. So what you see on a marketing might not be the same stuff you see within the product, which is certainly not the one that they do the podcast for. So that's another person. So we need to upgrade and educate the marketers and say, listen, we need to use sound and music in the same way we use visuals. Otherwise, we will get audio pollution. You will disturb your audience. So I hope that answered your question, even though it was pretty, large way around it. But it's about creating this audio strategy, understanding of where and why and how to use sound, just as they do with the visuals. Is it a small pencil it has to be printed on, or is it a big flag out of the flagship store? It's two different mediums.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Karsten. And it brings me nicely on to something that I know our worldwide audience are interested in. And this is around the role of, let's say, the cultural and contextual relevance, the cultural and contextual relevance
Yeah.
of sonic branding. Because on one hand, when I think about McDonald's or Netflix or big brands like that, they connect with a lot of countries with the sound being very similar or exactly the same as what they roll out in one country, they roll out in another. But I'm sure there must be examples where you just can't do that. You can't apply a global sonic branding strategy to every single region that you're in because of cultural differences, language, nuance, and the different interpretation of sound. But let me ask it another way. Are there mistakes that you see that brands are making when they're trying to maybe create this universal sonic identity? And how could you go about avoiding some of those mistakes?
Brands definitely do mistakes. And many years ago, there was this Danish brand who used a very Danish famous artist that was pretty well known, but that sound didn't go well in Holland. The Dutch people didn't like it. So there are definitely cultural differences, even between small countries like, in Scandinavia or Europe for that sake. So to go around that is simply just by testing. If you are going into the Indian market, which is a huge market, I wouldn't just assume that they also like, Coldplay or whatever we kind of guys lives in here in our part of the world. Of course, music is universal, and we also see more and more unified. Kate Perry and Taylor Swift is also global, but there are also cultural differences. So it is do testing. How is this sound perceived in that region? Do people understand it? Or perhaps does this sound conflict with another existing sound in that area? It could be that there's another brand who has sounds similar, or does this instrument has a negative this sound has a negative impact or understanding in that area. For instance, we did a interesting project here in Europe um, about a brand. I won't say the name, but we did some use of different voices. Whereas this voice in Scandinavia was experienced as an old way of singing, whereas the people down south in Europe thought it was yodeling, it was Germans, because they haven't heard that cultural thing. So just the way of singing can also make a lot of different things to the brand. So again, testing, but also acknowledge that the human voice is very important. We have a global brand as well, and we discovered that just by changing the voice to a local voice within that country really made a huge difference. So if you use a national British language for a brand that wants to go into to southern the states of the US, it could be Texas. You have to sound like a Texanian to be experienced as a trustworthy brand there. If you come with a Swinglish or Danish English accent or a purely British, you will be looked as abroad. They're not talking to me. These are foreigners. So if you have a voice, it's very important they are locally perceived. Whereas music can be more, it can cross borders more seamlessly. But if you have a huge media spend and going into a big market in a different part of the world, I will definitely recommend testing. Is this the right music? Do people understand this? Do we create the right recall and brand fit and likability when we use this sound?
Well, in terms of testing as well, we've seen some changes in your world, haven't we? Particularly, well, we've seen changes in a lot of people's worlds with the sort of launch and popularity of artificial intelligence. And I know it's becoming more sophisticated in generating, say, music and soundscapes. So while AI, I believe, can assist audio branding, is it a creative partner in the work that you're doing? Is it a disruptor to your industry? And where should brands draw the line between maybe this AI generated sound and maybe this human crafted sonic identity we're talking about today?
I think so, there's going to be a trend, Simon, towards, made by a real human, or just like you can go buy milk fair trade. This cow has been lived under these circumstances, or you also see picture. These are not retouched in some photo program. But today we see AI as a tool. It's not the solution. AI has been trained on thousands of music pieces. So it is trained, and it's really good to make some feedback forth and back to do some speed development. But we haven't seen, perhaps I'm just saying yet, a way I can prompt, I want a sound that sounds like a basketball hitting the floor together with a symphony, and then yada yada, and then it understands it, because it is complex, especially when it comes to small UI sounds within a couple seconds or audio logo. So we see it as a tool, just like when the sampler came out in the 80s and 90s. All drummers thought, oh no, I'm going to be unemployed because you can just sample the whole beat, and what should I do then? Today we see drummers play on top on samples. That's what we all do. So I also think we will see that, just like we do, we might get some done by AI, and we say, that's a good element, that's a good spice. Let's see how it can work within the total arrangement of the sound. So we use it as a tool. We also use it for analyzing. If the client says, we don't think this is romantic enough, or we don't think this is modern enough, say, okay, that's what you like, but let's go through some AI who has done millions of taggings of music, and here's the key attribute that comes out when the AI listens to this. So we use it as a partner in developing, and not as the solution. And I also feel still today, perhaps in 5 years, we have the same talk. I wouldn't hear any difference between all made by AI or not. But I still today I can hear the difference when it's handfully crafted, small details, small nuances is something that AI can't do yet. AI is good for writing long text, blogs, whatever, or scanning for medical issues and scanning pictures. But sound it's about emotions, and I don't think that AI has the emotions that we have. I mean, that is also why when you hear a piece of music from the old days, why should this piece of music from Slipknot go through, even though it's played wrong, it's out of tune, but it has so much soul into it. And can AI listen to the soul within the sound, even though he skip a note, or he's stretching the beat a bit? I don't feel that's at the time right now, and I also think there will be a retro, you know, stream towards going back to handmade, sound really acoustic, where you can hear some flaws. I think perfect will be boring, and just like we see with the vinyls having a revival, there might be, this audio logo is actually played by real humans in a real studio. Oh, that's a thing. Wow.
Yeah, for those of us old enough to remember that sort of little crackle and hiss as you drop the needle onto the vinyl,
Yeah,
that authenticity, right? Um,
definitely.
but yeah, there's something quite unique about made by humans, even though we use AI tools today. We'll see where we end up. And I want to ask you a little bit about measuring the success. So let's say we've invested in our sonic strategy, we've got this strategy in play. How do we go about measuring it? Because, in a traditional marketing sense, you're measuring things like the visual branding, not necessarily the sort of audio branding. So you can do brand recognition, you can do engagement with posts, you can check the usual sort of KPI dashboards. But what metrics or methodologies can you use to measure maybe a return on investment of your audio branding strategy?
We can definitely test on the effectiveness of an audio identity. So what we do is say, okay, Do you have any ground zero testing available? Have you ever tested how you sound today? Well, they don't often. So okay, let's test how your experience today. So we have a benchmark. Then 1 year later, we can say how many people can recognize you. What about recall or brand association? Do people think this might be a bank, or is it a car brand, or is it a tele company? So that's some physical things we can test in the market. And returns to return on investment, then I asked our clients, how much money have you spent the last 5 years on music? And very few can go back and pick out because it was part of the agency and this was done within the film budget, and I don't think we have used anything. Well, it hasn't been free. You must have paid something for all the music in the podcast, but there isn't any clear budget, so it's very difficult to say, okay, you used X amount of money the last 3 years, we'll do better for the Z amount of money. So what we usually say is, right now we can see that you have been buying a piece of music, and then you stop using it, and you find something new, and you stop using it and buy something new. So by having an order strategy, just like McDonald's and Coca-Cola, they don't invest in a new order log every year. They use the same one. So this consistency and coherence and keep using it in a creative way, that's where your KPIs or the return on investment is growing. Also said, we do know that brands that have an audiovisual logo, they performs better on all the parameters, more likable, more engaging, more interesting, less dull, etc. So that these things are proven. So my my answer to that is, if it wasn't been working, why should Intel, McDonald's, Audi, Coca-Cola, all these brands invest in audio branding if it didn't work? It is worth the money because people get to know you and also creates the emotions. And it can't be measured if they want to measure it, but it's most often just weavered into other budgets. Or how can you split a film? You only see the visuals without the sound. We can do that, but does that really make sense? I mean, but I definitely believe that the KPIs are out there, and also the return on investments, if we want to have had that discussion. But that's perhaps a whole discussion by itself, Simon, to dive
Yeah,
into how we can test that.
no, I like the answer, and the two things that spring to mind there is this: how people can chop and change, whereas you find the big brands, they kind of invest, get it right, and continually use it to build that sort of recognition. I think
I
that's
mean,
very interesting. And the second point that you made earlier was about starting at like a ground zero, a beginning point. So now you have this metric to track again. So what's it like today, and then what's it like 12 months later, or longer?
exactly. And I also think if you can manage to get the McDonald's on the air here, Simon, and ask them how much worth is your Orlo, how much percentage is it worth of the whole value of McDonald's? So we could play this game, Simon, where I can say I own McDonald's, and you want to buy McDonald's from me, and we say it costs $100 million. That's the price. But just before you sign, I say, by the way, Simon, you will not get the da 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 da. I'm gonna use that for the other brand. How much discount would you then ask? 10%, 20%, or even more? When 70% of the world population can actually say the brand name just by singing these 7 notes, how
Great
much
point.
value does that have? So that's what we call intangibles. And many brands today are made of 90% of the intangibles, which is the brand, the name, the colors, and the sound. And the more assets you have, that can be made into an intangible asset, the more value the overall brand has.
Look, before we run out of time, I want to ask you one more question, and
Sure.
it's a little bit about the future of audio and user experience and sonic branding, because we've seen, haven't we, with AI and chatbots, you can now talk to the internet, you can talk to these databases, you can get reasonable, coherent responses. We saw for a long time smart speakers come out where you could interface with them and buy things using them. And these sort of AR and VR headsets as well, now that we have, mixing with spatial audio, mixing with these voice interfaces, as I say, it's becoming more mainstream. And there's a whole generation coming through who are less familiar with typing on a traditional keyboard. Maybe they still use a virtual keyboard on their phone, But a lot of people now are just talking into a device to get responses that they need. So should brands be preparing for that now to stay ahead of the curve, because the interfaces are changing, aren't they?
Definitely. And I think you nailed it pretty good when you said that. I mean, yeah, AI, spatial audio is coming. I mean, we always respect a film with colors nowadays. We also expect it has stereo. But the next thing is, which has been around for many years, is surround sound. Spatial audio is also a thing. So why shouldn't an audio logo be spatial? Also, in terms of the car industry, within the car, which is going to be driverless, what should you do when you're driving a car when you don't need to drive? What should you hear? Where should the sounds come from? So there's a whole new domain here of mixed realities with VR, AR glasses, where you also can have some kind of mixed reality. I also tested the iPhone's headsets where you have this hear through, where you can also have them used as hearing aids. uh, how does that affect us as a company, for Apple, for instance? So there are so many techniques and technologies that are coming out now here. So I think it's difficult for me to say this is the new trend, this is the future. But definitely, sound has been growing on all platforms. You can talk to your fridge in modern fridge. Hey fridge, how much milk do you have? You know, hey Alexa, what's the weather going to be tomorrow in London? And it's going to answer you. So we also expect that. Uh, Also within the public transport, what notification sounds do we have? What people should navigate within that as well, just by having a small notification sounds when you check in at the transport. So it's just becoming more complex. To wrap it up, I would say, to go back to the beginning, that is why you need a strategy, and don't just to jump on. Hey, we need spatial, or we need the VR. I mean, is that really what we're going to do? Is that the journey? So stick to your strategy, and don't just play a sound because you can, because otherwise you might just create noise. So I'm not that guy who just jumps right into the new mixing, etc., because does it really make meaning at the moment? And I think we are trying that out right now. Has these VR glasses even become a thing? I haven't seen so many people on the streets yet. Perhaps it's because it's too expensive or they're too heavy to wear. I don't know. So that's my notes to that, Simon. I don't know if he gave you a confident answer, but I think if don't just type into a new trend just because you can. If it doesn't make meaning, you might, not get any value out of it.
No, I think it's a smart way of approaching it, because technologies have a way of ebbing and flowing and changing at a moment's notice. But the other point that you made, I think, really hits home that, on all platforms, as far as I can see, the sonic world is becoming more and more complex, more and more important to engaging consumers and businesses around the world. So thanks for sharing your wisdom with us today. It brings me nicely to the end of today's show with Karsten Kjems, and I just want to make people aware that we do this podcast on a regular basis, and we'd like to see you back here, where once again we'll be talking to some more very interesting people from all around the world here on the VistaTalks show. But Carson, thanks for being a guest. It's been really good to catch up with you today on this fascinating topic.
Thank you very much, Simon. It was a really pleasure, and yeah, we could talk for hours about this. So my last comment would be, for the audience, try to notice how many sounds you're hearing throughout the day. From the moment you wake up, to the coffee machine, to the elevator, to the train, to the notification from Slack, etc. How many sounds does annoy you, and what do you think sounds good? Just, to create more awareness and consciousness about, what are we surrounded with.
Great note to end on. Thank you, Carsten.
You're welcome, Simon.